Let's picture this. It's the year 2026, and after more than 60 years of holding on, the communist regime in Cuba is, well, it's on the verge of total collapse. Now, according to the scenario we're breaking down today, this is no accident. It's actually the endgame of a very calculated U.S. strategy, a geopolitical chess move that's aiming to do what decades of sanctions never could.
And that's the big question, isn't it? After surviving the Cold War, the fall of its biggest supporter, the Soviet Union, and decades of nonstop pressure from the U.S., could this finally be it? It's a massive question, and it's because the situation on the ground in this 2026 projection is incredibly grim.
So what's this number, 20? Well, according to intelligence reports in this scenario, that's the number of hours a day, 20 hours, that entire cities in Cuba are without electricity. And we're not just talking about some inconvenient power cuts here. This is a society teetering on the edge of a complete functional shutdown. Industry has ground to a halt, food is rotting, and the island is just stopping.
So how on earth did things get this bad, this fast? It all starts with a brand new U.S. strategy, an architect, and a master plan.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. The whole strategy isn't even really about Cuba, not directly. The main goal for this hypothetical administration is to contain China's growing power in Latin America. The plan? Go after China's key allies in the region. And the very first domino they decide to push is Venezuela.
And this is the guy pulling the strings. In this scenario, the source points to a hypothetical Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. As the son of Cuban immigrants, he doesn't just see this as policy, it's deeply personal. And because of that, his approach is described as less of a broad, clumsy pressure campaign and more like a surgical strike, aimed right at the regime's one true lifeline.
Which brings us to that first major play, making the Venezuelan domino fall. The whole strategy depends on cutting Cuba's lifeline by taking out its number one backer. And here's the turning point. With unbelievable pressure from the U.S. and a desperate need to stay in power, the regime in Caracas gets backed into a corner. They're forced to make a choice, a really practical one, give the Americans what they want in exchange for their own political survival.
And that first U.S. demand is incredibly direct, and for Cuba, it's absolutely devastating. Close the oil tap to Cuba. Just like that, that single command completely shatters the decades-long blood agreement between the two countries, where Cuba would give intelligence and military support, and Venezuela would keep the oil flowing.
And to really get the impact here, you have to look at this number, 50,000. That's 50,000 barrels of oil per day. Now, on a global scale, that's not a lot. But for Cuba, it was everything. It was the lifeblood of the island. It was the fuel that kept their ancient power plants sputtering to life. And now, that flow has been cut to zero. So, with Venezuela out of the picture, the walls really start to close in. Cuba is now an island totally isolated, with absolutely no saviors on the horizon. And this table just lays it all out, plain and simple. What about Mexico? Nope. They folded under U.S. pressure on trade and the border. China? Maybe? No way. They're focused on their own energy needs now, and Cuba is suddenly a very expensive charity case with zero return on investment. And Russia? You can forget about it. They are completely drained by the war in Ukraine. They don't have the money, the logistics, or honestly, any real reason to launch a rescue mission across the Atlantic. Okay. But hold on. Cuba's been through tough times before, right? They're famous for their resilience. So what makes this crisis so different? Why, after all these decades, does hope finally run out? This comparison really tells the whole story. Back in the 90s, during the special period, they had Fidel Castro, a larger-than-life leader who could get people fired up with revolutionary speeches. But by 2026, that ideology just feels empty to a population that is just tired. They're disconnected. And the really crucial part is that back then there was always some hope of foreign aid. But now, this new U.S. strategy has systematically cut off every single possibility of a rescue. Even the state security forces, the ones meant to keep order, are unpaid and their families are hungry. According to the source, it all comes down to the regime's breaking point, which is built on three massive structural failures that have just been waiting to crack.
So first up, the end of the subsidies. There's no one left to pay the bills. No Soviet Union, no Venezuela. The island is flat broke. Second, the guys with the guns. The whole repressive system is collapsing. Soldiers and police need to eat, they need to get paid. A soldier sitting in the dark wondering how to feed his family is not a reliable defender of the revolution. And third, the American strategy itself.
which has just brilliantly and ruthlessly cut off every single escape route.
So here's the real kicker. The magic trick is over. The illusion of power is just gone. In past crises, the government could tell people to sacrifice, to hold on, because help was on the way. Now, there's literally no light at the end of the tunnel. And the Cuban people, who are more connected to the outside world than ever, they can see the truth. The king isn't just naked, he's broke, and he is completely alone.
And we'll end on this powerful thought. History has shown us time and time again that totalitarian regimes can look invincible, like they'll last forever, right up until the moment they don't. And in this 2026 scenario, with the lights going out all across Havana, you're left with one big, hanging question. Is this the day the sun finally sets on the Cuban Revolution?